Good evening. Let's try it again. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for attending this event today. Thank you, really. This is our fourth of the Chancellor's Speaker Series. We are delighted to have with us tonight the Honorable John Ashcroft. He has devoted most of his life to public service. The Honorable Ashcroft served as U.S. Attorney General from 2001 to 2005 in the administration of President George W. Bush. In this role, he led the U.S. Justice Department, one of the world's premier law enforcement bodies and a key federal executive department. He integrated the strategic planning, budgeting, and performance measures, which resulted in a clean audit for the first time in the department's history. Prior to this, he was elected to the U.S. Senate, where he authored budget rules protecting Social Security and Medicare and helped balance the federal budget for the first time in decades. The Honorable Ashcroft served as governor of Missouri from 1985 to 1993. During this time, he balanced 8 consecutive budgets, built a $120 million budget surplus, and established a $190 million operating reserve. Before becoming governor, John Ashcroft served 2 terms as the Missouri Attorney General. In 1973, he served as the state's auditor as well. Raised in Springfield, Missouri, he attended public schools until enrolling at Yale University, where he graduated with honors in 1964. He received his Juris Doctor from the University of Chicago in 1967. He taught business law at Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri, before entering public service. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable John Ashcroft.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, what a nice introduction. It's good to have a friend to introduce you. And he's so kind and so convincing. He called me up just a few months ago and said, "John, do you believe in free speech?" I said, "Yeah, I believe in free speech." He says, "Well, I want you to come to Rolla and make one." And I wish my mom and dad had been here to hear that introduction. My father would have been proud. My mother would have believed the whole thing. I'm really grateful to you. I want to express my gratitude to this university for its leadership. Everyone in our state knows that this is the best of the best in terms of student population, in terms of the demand for excellence, in terms of individuals who leave here being compensated well. This is a great institution, and I appreciate what it's meant not only to Missouri, but what it has meant nationally. So I'm delighted to be here. And thank you in your introduction for not mentioning that I'm the only person in the history of American politics to have lost his Senate seat to a deceased opponent. That's easy for you guys to laugh about, but politics is this way. Politics is a little bit like a roller coaster, and I think you could help me a little bit. I can't see you at all, so I may ask you for an oral response, but if I say something that's relatively pleasing, if you could say something like, "ah," let me try it. Could you say, "ah, ah, ah"? Yeah, and if I say something that's pretty desperately dangerous, would you say, "ooh, ooh"? Yeah, I had a friend who was flying on a sunny day in an airplane. Yeah. But the engine quit. But there were parachutes on board. But the parachute wouldn't open. But he was headed for a haystack. The haystack had a pitchfork in it. But he missed the pitchfork. He missed the haystack. That's a little bit the way politics is. That's the way public service can be. And I've had that opportunity to ride the oohs and ahs, and thank you for not mentioning the times when I've lost those elections. But I am pleased to be here with you and to share with you a little bit. I want to talk to you about something that I consider to be the core value of life itself. It's the value of liberty. It's something that's meant important things to important people all through the history of this country. I think of Isaac Norris and his friends in Philadelphia in the 1730s. They sent off to England and ordered a bell. It wasn't just to be a church bell or a school bell. It was to be a liberty bell, and it bore on its metal the inscription from Leviticus, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land." And then most of us, at least of my generation, learned about Patrick Henry and his impassioned speech before the Virginia Assembly when he said, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Of course, Samuel Adams converted the harbor in New York into the world's largest teapot when he and his friends dumped the British tea into the harbor. They were all called the Sons of Liberty. And you know, of course, our founding documents, including the Declaration of Independence, so we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty at the core of that. Of course, the preamble to the Constitution, wow, it's just all over the place that liberty is the number one value that's expressed. And the Constitution says that we do ordain that the benefits and blessings of liberty be protected by this document. I became the Attorney General of the United States in 2001 in January, and I wasn't quite as understanding of the challenges that would occasion my time in office as I became later on when on 9/11 we were the subject of a vicious terrorist attack. We had about 2,900 people plus killed. More people died in that single attack than the attack on Pearl Harbor that started the Second World War, and it became apparent to us that there was a new dynamic for defending the liberty of the American people. We had once lived in a setting where, I better take this watch off because once I get rolling, who knows how long I'll speak. Reminds me of the boy went to church with his father and was inquiring of the father, "What does this mean? What does that mean?" The preacher took his watch off and laid it on the podium, and the boy says, "What does that mean?" And his father says, "It means absolutely nothing at all." And I hope I can keep from. But it became clear to me that America could no longer expect the oceans, its isolation geographically, to protect it from very serious threats and harm that could be devastating in terms of the liberty of the American people. And we began to implement a variety of strategies to try and secure the liberty. And people would ask me, and frankly, over and over again, they asked me, how do you balance security with liberty? And I reject the idea that we need to balance liberty with anything. Liberty stands as its own unique value in terms of providing a basis for people to do things and to be rewarded for what they do, to take risks and be rewarded, to behave well and be rewarded, behave poorly and perhaps suffer the consequences. But liberty itself is this ability for merit to triumph. That's what's made America great. And security is valuable, but I like to always say, what are we securing? And I think the thing that impressed me most to say is that the thing that we should secure more than anything else is we should secure the liberty of the American people. So it fell in substantial measure to me as my responsibility that, especially when the President of the United States looked in my direction, I think it was in the Situation Room, but if not in the Oval Office, and said, "Don't ever let this happen again." There goes the watch. I thought to myself, well, we've got to be serious about this, and we've got to understand that we are not insulated or isolated to the extent that we can ignore the threats, but we need to secure our liberty. It is not that security is to be balanced against liberty. It's not something in competition with liberty. It's designed to enhance our liberty. You know, and technology, and this is a citadel of technology. I'm not talking about the citadel in Carolina. I'm talking about here in Missouri, because you are the technical, scientific community that sustains this community. And there has been a progression of development, scientific and technological, that changes the nature of threats to the people of the United States and to people in communities across the world. Some of you may have read David McCullough's book called 1776, a wonderful volume about the Patriots, and they were standing on the hills overlooking the Boston Harbor, and they could actually see the British fleet arriving. It was not something that was particularly eminent. They could see it on the horizon. The fleet was reliant on wind power to bring them to do whatever they were going to do, and the colonists knew that it couldn't be all that good if the fleet was arriving, but you had the sense that the urgency was not there. I think they said, let's go down to Panera's and get a cup of coffee and come back and see how much progress they've made. In those days, black powder, I think, was the most destructive of things known to man. So that you could fill maybe a podium like this with black powder and touch it off and give everybody here a headache, or maybe even damage a few people, maybe others with ringing in their ears for weeks. But the lethality wasn't there that we now experience. So that technology has resulted in the arrival of lethality. Now, in something the size of this podium, there might be a concealed nuclear weapon. It's very, very, and of course, nuclear is not the only threat. We had to guard against biochemical threats as well, and the idea that the chemistry, evil biology, might be spread by the population itself. If released at the right airport, it might be spread by people going to their various destinations all across the world, and we had to begin to have a different philosophy as it related to securing the national security and the liberty of people that comes with a secure nation. And that's why I just wanted to say that liberty is very important, and it demands that we work hard to secure it. I want to make a few remarks later on about personal safety and security, but I'll start out with national security and some of the things that have been in the news recently and you may have heard about. One of the things that happened in regard to national security is that we needed to improve our ability to prevent the kind of deliverable and lethal instrumentalities that threatened the American people. I say deliverability. While lethality skyrocketed, deliverability, the impairments of deliverability plummeted. All kinds of things could get here very fast. As a matter of fact, the last couple of weeks have shown us that even since 9/11, the ability of people to transport threats, to launch them. We watched as Israel was trying to defend against 300 incoming missiles on one night. And to my delight, and to the credit of the technical genius of the defense industry, they were almost 100% effective in shooting down those instrumentalities of destruction designed to kill more Israeli people. And so the deliverability is one thing, lethality is the other thing, but it becomes clear that if we wait just to respond to the kind of destruction that awaits those who might not take preventative measures, we could really have a very big problem on our hands. So we have to understand that the new modality in defending is not to prosecute the offenders, it's to prevent the offense, at least when it comes to major threats to the significant levels of the population. Of course, you remember 9/11, the people who committed the offense designed the offenses in ways that they would destroy themselves in the perpetration of the crime. Now, it's not a big threat to say to a person, we're going to punish you if you do this, if they've already said, no, we're going to kill ourselves in the process of doing it. So prevention becomes a very serious and necessary strategy. And I would just indicate to you that prevention is very much more difficult than prosecution is. And normally we rely on prosecution to say to people, if you're in certain kinds of behavior, you're involved in certain things, we're going to prosecute you. And to prosecute somebody, you have to assemble the facts of what happened and provide that as a basis for decision-making in the adjudication process. So there are a limited number of facts. It's a little bit like having a puzzle with the box tops. You do this sometimes on a rainy day, or maybe you don't. But you put the puzzle pieces out, and then you look at the box tops, and you can figure out where it goes. It's something that's predetermined. And that's the way we've tried to deter bad behavior. But if you don't have the event before you, and you're trying to prevent it from happening, it's almost like having 1,000 puzzles, which are potential scenarios, strewn around the room with no box tops, and finding enough interlinking pieces that signal that there's something that's a very serious threat that could in substantial ways impair the liberties of the American people. Now, I think it's pretty easy to understand it's a lot harder to anticipate and prevent than it is to assemble the facts and to prosecute. But that's where we found ourselves with the challenge for preventing additional harm as a result of terrorism to the American people, and I have to commend the authorities who since then have been relatively successful in so doing. So we found ourselves needing additional tools, and the additional tools were additional tools that would help us gain information. Information is the friend of prevention. It's also important in prosecution, but you have to process a lot of information in trying to identify where there are pieces coming together that might be so threatening when they are joined that they could undermine and seriously damage the environment of liberty for the American people. And that's what we did when we had what was called the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was an outgrowth of upgrading the system known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. Foreign intelligence surveillance allows, with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court's approval, the surveillance of people who are foreign agents or foreign powers or agents of foreign powers. And it's important to be able to surveil those individuals who are most likely to be threatening to the United States. There were a number of capacities, though, in our criminal law that allowed us to work against organized crime, for example, but were not capacities that had been authorized for use against foreign agents, agents of foreign powers. For example, during the 1980s, drug dealers learned that they were being surveilled as a result of court orders on their telephones. And they learned that the orders were that a specific piece of equipment, a telephone, was the subject of an order, and if you used that phone, you could be surveilled. Well, the drug community is pretty innovative. They started using throwaway phones. They would buy a new phone every 2 weeks at the local convenience store, and they would then avoid. So the law relating to those kinds of surveillances was changed so that instead of the order indicating you could only surveil what happened on that particular handset or machine or telephone, you could surveil the conduct of a specific individual, and the surveillance could travel with the individual not only in a particular district, but across state lines if necessary. These kinds of amendments became a part of the FISA program, where we would be able to surveil, and I frankly was a participant in working to have ordered thousands of surveillances of individuals who were either foreign powers, agents of foreign powers, overseas in substantial measure, and in the United States as well. During the last few years, though, there have been some very serious abuses of this that came as a result of the the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And it resulted in damage to a number of people who are American citizens. You may be familiar with some of those cases, you may not, but they manufactured evidence in order to get warrants to surveil individuals, and they changed interview reports, they changed documents so that the FISA court would order surveillances of individuals that clearly were not appropriately surveilled. The American people have a right to remain unsurveilled and unspied upon by their government. You may remember the case of Carter Page, a Naval Academy graduate who had some dealings in Russia, but no indication that any of his dealings was anything less than some of the commerce that goes on between the United States and Russia. And there is commerce that goes on between them. One of their aircraft manufacturing companies makes the largest of all air transports that we have used in the United States to ferry equipment across the globe to other places where we needed either helicopters or other military equipment. Carter Page was surveilled, not because he was a threat to national security, but because he was a part and associate of the Trump campaign. Donald Trump's campaign was targeted. Others were what are called unmasked. In other words, it was advertised that they were being surveilled. And you can imagine what would happen to your reputation if it was known or understood by a wide population of people that you were being surveilled because you were a suspected terrorist. And these items happened pursuant to the Patriot Act, or subsequent to it, but not because of the Patriot Act, but because individuals broke the law relating to the Patriot Act. And recently, you've seen in the United States Congress a significant effort to reform the Patriot Act to provide additional safeguards. Over the last decade, I've suggested a number of safeguards. The first is that, now I have to explain a little bit. When you're seeking an order to surveil a particular person, that's what's called an ex parte order. You can't tell the person that you're going to surveil them and ask them to come in and defend against that in court because, as I used to put it, in the deadly game of terrorism and the deadly game of hide and seek that's a part of it, if the hiders know where the seekers are going to look, it doesn't work. So there is what's called an ex parte proceeding. It's a proceeding before the court that asks the court to issue a warrant, basically, but doesn't include the ability of a person to defend himself against the warrant. And that had worked pretty well as long as the people seeking the warrants were fully disclosing the circumstances and facts to the FISA judges who make those warrants available. The truth of the matter is, though, they began to warp the evidence, provide inadequate or incomplete evidence, or provide false evidence in an effort to get warrants to surveil American citizens who would not otherwise be available for surveillance or eligible or the subject of a warrant for surveillance. I recommend that we do something to correct that. And we should have something like a defender in the system that makes sure that everything possible is done to protect the safety and security of Americans from unwarranted surveillance. And we have something like that when a child's interest is being represented in court. There's something called a guardian ad litem, where someone is appointed to represent the interests of the child. I don't know this is a total cure-all, but I think it would be something well considering. Second thing is that in criminal law, in the event that the prosecutor learns that there are exculpatory facts, finds out that there are things that would help prove your innocence, there is a rule in American justice that the prosecutor has to give that evidence and make it known to the defendant. We have these things that we've discovered that make you look more innocent than guilty. The prosecutor has to do that. There ought to be a clear rule like that so that the court in FISA applications, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, warrant applications, the court should order and should make it a responsibility of the FBI or the federal authority seeking the FISA warrant to provide that information to the court. A third thing is that this idea of unmasking or making public the idea of the fact that a person is the subject of FISA warrants should be limited. And it should be that you have to go back to court to have authority to discuss publicly the fact that someone is the subject of a FISA warrant. A fourth thing I've recommended is that we limit access to raw data. Too many people, when I was there, I think we had an access of about 5 individuals to the raw data. It was expanded in subsequent years to about 20-some individuals. And the idea that the raw data would be somehow leaked provides a national security risk, and it also provides a real risk to the individual who's being surveilled. It should not be made public. So I think we should have a limitation on the people who have access to raw data, and that's based on a principle that's well known in Washington. You may have heard it before, that in Washington, 3 people can keep a secret as long as 2 of them are dead. The town leaks like a sieve, and there's no need for us. The last thing that I've recommended is that when FBI agents write up their reports, they write up reports of interviews, but they never record the interviews. And I think really what we need to do is step back from the writing requirement to a recording requirement. So if the FBI is interviewing someone, rather than later on figuring out what they thought was said, there's no reason with modern technology not to provide not only an audio copy, but in most cases a video copy that what indeed was said. Now these are some of the things that have been recently, some of these things have been recently enacted. You've seen the debate over FISA warrants and the like in the House of Representatives. Some people have said we ought to abandon FISA, that we shouldn't have the surveillance authority at all. I think that would be ridiculous given the lethality and deliverability of modern weaponry. I believe it's in our national security interest and the security interest that's necessary for us to remain as people of liberty, that we continue to have the capacity to assemble information to default, disrupt, or otherwise prevent terrorist activities, rather than to have those activities somehow happen based on surprise. There was enough of a surprise in 9/11 that made me wish never to ever have it happen again. And it would have been my pleasure to have that conviction had the president not looked in my direction and actually said that to me. But he knew the right thing to say, and I think we knew the right things to do. Survival of the American national security depends on it, and it's reliant on technical capacity, and that's something that this institution is well known for and is understood for. I said I would touch a little bit on personal safety as well as national security, because the liberty of individuals depends on their ability to be free from the incidents of crime. And I believe that we have witnessed in recent days a substantial increase in crime in America. Now, I think most of you have had to have a course in statistics at some time or another. If you haven't, you probably will. In our law school, they had a course, the textbook of which was How to Lie with Statistics. The slogan of the book was "Figures lie and liars figure." I don't know. I don't think that's really true. We do need to measure outcomes, and we need to know how things are caused and what their effect is if we want to redress problems. And but Americans don't feel safe, and the FBI keeps coming out and saying to us that our national crime statistics don't show an increase. And I'm sorry to say that Jeffrey Anderson, who was the former head of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, has revealed that in the not distant past, but the last couple of years, the FBI has made a new demand, rather bureaucratic, for the way in which things are reported, and fully 1/6, or about 1/6, he indicates, of all the cities in the United States, urban centers are no longer reporting their crime statistics to the FBI. Now, absent the statistics from Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, for example, three of the cities that are no longer reporting the statistics, you can see why they might be able to say to you that crime is going down in America, but it's hard to believe, especially if you spend any time watching the news at all, and if you're not shocked by some of the terrible things that are happening in terms of our urban settings, you ought to be. The 4 individuals, police individuals that were killed this last week in North Carolina are just another shocking indication that we have got our system mixed up in the defense of liberty. If we're going to defend personal security, we have to understand that law enforcement is the friend of personal security. It's not the enemy of personal security. And the individuals populating the law enforcement community are not enforcing some sort of, to be disparaged, racial hatred, but they are trying to save the lives and protect the security of individuals, and they are often doing so at the very expense of their own well-being and safety, leaving families behind in tragic circumstances. Violent crime rose from 2019 by 14% between 2019 and 2022. In the worst of the assault cases, it was a 37% increase in the serious assault category. And this is not a result of the FBI statistics, but a result of the National Crime Victim Survey, which is a far more accurate way of telling you that what you think you're seeing on TV, as a matter of fact, is really happening. We are in a significant setting where we are losing the war against individuals who will act irresponsibly in regard to others' safety and security and their liberty. One of the things that really is stressing to me is that Missouri does not have a particularly advantageous or good record in terms of protecting some of the most vulnerable people in the United States of America. The black homicide rate, the rate at which black people are murdered in Missouri is higher than it is in any other state. And it is even higher than it is in the neighboring state of Illinois. And the solution to this is not to disparage police or to say that they are not to be trusted. As a result of my experience, I know something about how to drive crime down. It's to prosecute offenders, and to prosecute offenders without regard to who they are, except whether or not they in fact are guilty of committing the crime. Between 2001 and 2003, during my time as Attorney General, President Bush asked me to launch a crime prosecution initiative relating to gun crime and the personal safety and liberty of people. We had a 27% violent crime decrease, a 32% decrease in violent rape and sexual assault, 31% decrease in robberies, 29% decrease in aggravated assault, and a 24% increase in the number of crimes that were used committing a gun. There are ways to do that, but the way to do it is not to suggest that we are the victims of racially motivated police officers whose intent is to deprive us of our liberty rather than to somehow secure our liberty. It's a tragedy indeed that a young black person is 25 times more likely to be killed in a drive-by shooting than a young white person is. And it's something we should not tolerate in our society. But we should not excuse it or explain it based on some idea of racial inequity. It is to be explained because we are failing to enforce the law, because we are too concerned about some disparity, that the people who perpetrate the crimes might be overly representative of one group instead of another. The truth of the matter is we can't worry about the disparity from who the criminals are. We must protect the individuals who rightfully deserve our protection, the American citizens, and that's very important. I'm a little bit concerned about the idea of disparity driving us away from reasonable solutions to problems in our culture. Now, a few years ago, I was speaking at a pretty prestigious meeting. I don't know what a hillbilly from Missouri was doing there, really, but they invited me to come to a place called Davos, Switzerland, to speak at the World Economic Forum. And in one of the meetings, it was my task to speak to what they alleged were the 100 richest guys in the world, and they were lamenting the fact that there was poverty and that there was disparity for people basically in Africa between the richest and the poorest. And I don't believe that disparity is something that causes poverty. And I finally, after hearing them discuss that pretty significantly, I looked at a fellow named Michael Dell. Some of you know something about Dell computers, and he's not a person who's fresh out of cash by any means. And I said, Michael, I said, there's more disparity between your income with your companies and my income as this Attorney General of the United States. There's more disparity between those two incomes than there is between any two people in the nation, in the continent of Africa. I said that the disparity between the rich and the poor in the United States is the greatest that it is in any country of the world. And yet we have the least poverty of any country in the world, and we have the most prosperity. And it occurs to me that before we get too spun up on the idea of disparity and trashing anything that provides for disparity, we ought to think about disparity is the friend of prosperity. People are flocking to the United States because they want disparity rather than equity of outcome. Now, I'll be all for equity of opportunity. Let me just say, you can count me in on that, and I'll defend it as long as the day is and through the night as well. But when it comes to outcomes, I think there ought to be different outcomes for different inputs. And for people who do well, they ought to be rewarded. There ought to be a merit-based opportunity for people of high productivity and creativity to be rewarded. I'm personally delighted that Elon Musk has come to the United States to make his millions and become the richest person in the world. I'd rather the United States be a place that rewards innovation, productivity, creativity, and development rather than one that says all people will be equal. They will be rewarded with equity, just like the Venezuelans have been rewarded with equity and causing them to stream across our southern border and seeking an opportunity to distinguish themselves because they're willing to make something of themselves and be rewarded according to their merit rather than disparity. So it's with this in mind that we need to be careful in our criminal justice system not to be too sensitive to the idea of one group or another having a disparate participation and consequence for crime. We ought to ask ourselves, how do we first secure the American people and then address problems that might contribute to a person's willingness to commit crime? But we can't come from the backside of this and expect to make Americans safe and secure. Well, with that in mind, I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you. You've been a most courteous audience, and I haven't been able to see anybody leave. Also, this cover of darkness probably will reveal an empty auditorium as soon as the lights go on. I thank you for inviting me. I thank you for making the investment in the human resources that are associated with the people of Missouri so that we can continue to be an opportunity and development of growth that welcomes people based on their contributions to live well and to provide a basis for the advancement of our culture. May God richly bless you, the state of Missouri, and the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashcroft. Clearly, the depth of analysis that you expect from a Yale and University of Chicago education. Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Larry Gregg will now moderate a question and answer session. Dr. Gregg is our university's historian and a curator's distinguished teaching professor emeritus of history here at Missouri S&T. So, Larry, you have it.
Thank you. Let me add my welcome, Mr. Attorney General. It's nice to have you here. What we've done in this procedure,
Right there.
now there they are, they're all out there.
Good. It's not even like church where everybody fills up the back row first. This is
What we invited folks to submit questions.
Good.
And you can see they submitted lots of questions.
Let's get after it. And then if anybody has another question you want to ask that he's afraid to ask, shoot, you know. I'm in my 80s. There's nothing I have to lose. So.
Now, I will say to all of you out there, I asked Mr. Attorney General if there are any subjects he wanted me to avoid, and he said, go right ahead, ask anything you want. So what I've tried to do is look through all the questions submitted and I've put together, I think, a representative sample of what people would like you to talk about. So let's get started. There has been a rise in isolationist sentiment in the U.S. given our current domestic problems. What is your opinion on withdrawing all or most military personnel from foreign nations so the United States can turn its focus inward?
I don't think it's a good idea for us to withdraw from the world community. I think we saw what happens when we do that in the Second World War. Sooner or later, I think most of the history now indicates that Hitler intended to come to the United States after he cleaned up Europe. It doesn't mean I'm in favor of every time someone sneezes that we run in with a box of Kleenex. And I think the problem is a greater problem than it is just in terms of whether we're going to devote the resource at home or devote the resource abroad. It's a resource we don't have. We are something like $30-some trillion in debt. And we're in debt to China, and China is funding both Russian aggression and the Iranian threat. It's a complex idea, but we need to get our own spending under control. I just got to do this really quickly. I talked earlier about the Patriots at the time of our independence. There was a slogan that says, we will not tolerate taxation without representation. And King George was over there spending, but not, paying the tax, I submit that the United States is in the same place right now. The gulf that separated the taxer, King George, from the colonies was a geographic gulf, pardon me. The gulf that separates the spenders, us now, from the people who have to pay for it later is generational, not geographic. And we very shortly need to get under control our spending, or a generation that has had no representation is going to be asked to pay all of our bills for our indulgences. So let me just put this in a frame of reference. We need to be very careful about our spending. And included in that care should be that we should have great restraint in what we do overseas. But I'm not willing to swear off defending liberty where it's severely threatened overseas, especially when those who are promoting that threat ultimately have designs on the United States.
Thank you. Second question is, what do you think about the current state of the Republican Party?
I'm not a member of an organized political party. I'm a Republican. And I think there are times when, we teach people to think independently, and we cherish that. I believe that's not just Republican, that's American. But there are times when we would be best served to operate as a team. Now, we do that as a nation. I remember shortly after 9/11, it galvanized people. And when we feel threatened, I think there are times when we need to understand that complete independent thinking by everybody and to demand that everything be exactly in accordance with one's own ideas can be counterproductive. And I think that's one of the problems the Republican Party faces right now. I don't mean that we should abandon our idea of principles and truth. And my own view is that by and large the Republican Party is willing to face up to the reality of where the world is and where the United States is right now in a unique way. I wish they were more willing to do it as it relates to deficits and the like. And I wanted to thank Reverend Dr. Moe for having introduced me as being part of the last time the federal budget was balanced. It's nice of you to say that. It was balanced in one sense. but not with all the off-budget stuff. But it was, I like to say it was close enough to being balanced that we could lie about it. And there is no, we're not within a galaxy of balancing the budget now, and we need to be thinking about that. I guess I'm returning redundantly to the same issues, but I think responsibility and honesty and integrity all belong as components of the ethics that are necessary in government, and includes, you know, who we're blaming for the problems that we have in crime, and how we're going to handle those problems. We need to be forthright about it and not divide the country in hopes that the division can result in an election outcome that's based on the resentment of one group or another. That's probably misled and should be aware of the truth. Frankly, should embrace law enforcement rather than reject it. Next. Let's do this quickly enough so if somebody wants to second guess me, they can do it from the audience, because that's always more fun.
Not since Franklin Delano Roosevelt has there been such an effort to pack the Supreme Court as now. What is your view on this topic?
Well, first of all, I don't know that there's an effort to pack the court. Roosevelt wanted to add additional members. That was the way, my understanding is. And he wanted to pack the court. He couldn't get 5 out of 9, so he wanted to make it, add another 3 members or so he could get 7 out of 12, and he could add the 3 members of his choice. If you mean by packing the court, appointing people that believe what you believe about the Constitution of the United States, every president in the United States has packed the court with every appointment he made. Now, the dichotomy in terms of between presidents here, I think, is whether or not they think the Constitution is something that is a so-called living document that evolves and doesn't mean what it was said to mean and what the language says it means, or whether it's something that we should go back to what it means in the writing. I happen to believe that Clarence Thomas we claim him from Missouri. I shared an office with him in the Assistant Attorney General's office in Jefferson City for 16 months. He believes that the Constitution means what it says. He doesn't mean that it can't be changed, but he means that one of the things the Constitution provides is the way that it can be changed, and not that it morphs over time to follow the majority opinion of American people. And frankly, I think it's very difficult to signal that it was ever intended to be something that would be controlled by opinion polls. And I think that's the ultimate outcome of the idea that you have an organic constitution, you know, that's amoebic. If it needs to ooze over here to cover something we want it to cover, we can have it ooze over by amending it in the back room with 5 guys in black robes, rather than submitting an amendment to the states for ratification in accordance with the Constitution itself. And I'm pretty wishy-washy on that opinion, you could tell.
Well, connected with that one is this 4th question. What are your thoughts on presidential immunity while someone is in office?
I think for official acts, the president has to be immune. This may stun you. I just got through submitting a brief to the Supreme Court, and the case was argued this last week. I think the idea that you go to a president anytime he's trying to make a decision in what he's doing, and you threaten that you're going to sue him or you're going to prosecute him. It would have to prosecute Thomas Jefferson for the Louisiana Purchase, prosecute Harry Truman for dropping the bomb on the Japanese. It was obviously a violation of international law that killed civilians. I mean, and the president takes an oath that he has to faithfully execute the laws to see that they are faithfully followed. I think even if you had a real basis, I can't speak on the facts clearly here, but if you have a real basis as a president of the United States, and you think that there has been an election irregularity that disrupts the outcome of an election, you have a responsibility. You are sworn duty to do something about it. You are the executive office. Now, here's what I think will happen. If they don't provide immunity, I expect every president at 11:59 on the day before he leaves office to pardon himself prospectively for all the things he's done. Now, this would leave him eligible for prosecution by state prosecutors in the event there's some violation of a state law, particularly could be in direct conflict with the federal law. For example, marijuana is still a Schedule I substance in the United States Code, which means it is illegal. All kinds of states have. Missouri's right up here with among the smokiest of potheads. And if the president were to take action against, in controversy, you could threaten him now, we're going to come after you for having violated the Missouri law because you enforced the federal law. I know there'd be preemption questions about the federal law, but the idea that somehow a president of the United States has to look over his shoulder. Now, there's some real nonsense going on right now. Pardon me, I don't mean to offend any of you, but this idea of going back to something that happened 8 years ago, long before Trump was president, and conjuring it up. The statute of limitations expired years ago, but they said, oh, because it was related to an election and it might be considered election to affect an election, then we're going to go ahead and all the enforcement agencies of the federal government, of the Biden Justice Department, said this isn't prosecutable. You get a rogue prosecutor in the state of New York who decides to say what he can about, this is beyond the pale. So I frankly, I think I would expect Biden to pardon himself. It wouldn't surprise me if he were to pardon other individuals with similar names at the end of his term. That's something a president can do. And I've pardoned people. I was governor of the state of Missouri. I know what it means to pardon people. I've had to preside over death penalty matters, including the execution of citizens. I know these are serious things. But constitutional authorities have to be respected, and constitutional responsibility should be undertaken. So now, if the president goes out and shoots somebody on the street in Washington, that's not an official act. Let me just add one other thing. The Constitution of the United States says that the president is subject to prosecution once having been impeached and convicted by the Senate. Okay, I'm willing to play that game with the Constitution. It provides a leavening or maybe a sobering idea that just not any willy-nilly prosecutor who wants to around the country can tie the president in knots. And do you know what it costs to defend yourself in court? A president wouldn't have to even feel guilty if he just knew that he'd have to go and defend himself against outrageous charges and somehow endure the indignity of it all. Look, I know what it means to spend money on defense lawyers. After I left the Justice Department 1 month in the summer of 2005, I think my legal bills were $40,000 because people wanted to sue me. Now, there's pretty good protection against frivolous lawsuits against public officials, but $40,000 for a guy who I think I made $140,000 as Attorney General, and I don't think I ever made $100,000 as governor. I think I started as Attorney General at $45,000. We don't pay big money, and if you get rich in the state of Missouri as a public official, you ought to be investigated. So I don't have any reservation. Now, if the Constitution says that if you're impeached and convicted, then prosecution can proceed, fine. One other point. The president can't pardon, I don't think, state offenses. So you have 50 potential state prosecutors who could find reasons to prosecute former presidents. And we are at a whale of a dark time in this country if this is the way we feel we want to shape foreign policy, or domestic policy, pardon me. And why don't you ask some wishy-washy question where I won't have to give.
Okay, we'll move to a different topic. Is there anything you wish you had done differently in your time as Attorney General?
You know, I wish I had been more aware of the potential for 9/11 threats. I had asked intelligence officials, because we had the Dar es Salaam bombing, and we had the Cole over in the Middle East, the ship that was, and I asked, is there any of this, is this coming here? They didn't signal to me that we were in jeopardy. I think one of the things we tried to do with the Patriot Act is correct the ignorance of the American system. Prior to Patriot Act, you couldn't have discussions between the intelligence community and the law enforcement community, because law enforcement was designed to elicit things that could be used in court as evidence, and the rules for the intelligence community might not satisfy the evidentiary requirements, so this wall was built. And it turns out there were people with fragments of information on each side of the wall. If they had been combined, we might have been able to disrupt the 9/11. And we got after it. We wrote it into the Patriot Act and got that corrected. And I'm pleased that I had a part in that, a rather substantial part. But I didn't want to have the president look at me and saying, why did you let this happen again?
Different kind of question. What are your thoughts on the current state of intense polarization in American politics?
Well, I find that at the core, we're united. At the periphery, we find ways to be divided. Now, I don't know that this won't be on the quiz or the final exam, so don't worry about this. But as I watched our response to 9/11, it was amazing. All kinds of people, street people living in refrigerator boxes under overpasses in Washington, D.C., had flags on the side of their refrigerator boxes. And if you think about the mix of things that we grapple with as a culture, if the defense of liberty, which I meant to talk about today, and I hope I got that over in some measure, as that's at the core, people can unite around that. We get attacked, people suck it up, we're together on this. You get way out at the fringe of things and start legislating everything from whether men and women can appear in the same sports teams and all this. I don't know how to say this without offending a bunch of people, but, you know, legislating one's gender, you're a long way from the core of what government's supposed to be doing. And so the further we get out, whether people want to take over my medical care or tell me what I can think or say or do, there's a lot of room for disagreement out there. And that's where the disagreement happens. And it tends to roll itself back into core issues, but I think it really starts, the real separation starts when we get government way out beyond what we ever really thought it ought to be dealing with in the first place.
How has the U.S. Senate changed since you were a senator?
Well, you know, it does seem a lot more partisan. And there were people in the Senate that I knew I could count on to do the right thing on both sides of the aisle. Senator Feingold, Wisconsin, was I was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was the next in line, the minority guy. If I needed to leave the committee meeting, I didn't have to worry that he would somehow try and sneak a bunch of stuff through without telling me. And I wouldn't try and drag dead cats past him without him noticing so that he would be embarrassed. Frankly, there is an aggression on the part of the Senate in some ways that I don't understand. I couldn't understand Chuck Schumer's demand that the president of Israel be replaced. It would have been unthinkable when I was in the Senate for us. We were always having enough trouble figuring out our own policies rather than to tell a foreign power how that foreign power should select its leadership, and frankly, how it should conduct itself in its defense. And if you got a question on that, I'll answer that too.
Now, Chancellor Degani didn't have any role in these questions, but I think he would like to hear your answer to this one, which will be our last question. How do you feel Missouri could or should improve funding for public education?
I'm really not qualified to answer that. I don't know that it should. It may be that it should look carefully at how it's spending its resources and develop ways to, you know, when I was governor, and this is before any of you were born, people came to me and said, we're not spending as much as money as Illinois is. We need to spend more on our schools. And you know who was telling me that? A bunch of industrialists who make their living by producing what they produce more efficiently than their competitors, not less efficiently than their competitors. We ought to be focused on the output and outcome from our educational institutions, not on how we can spend more money. I think it's, and very frankly, I don't know that the public's going to have a great stomach for spending more money on higher education, given the evidence that parades in the streets about the level of awareness on the part of people who we're spending a lot of the money on. I mean, you ask a student in the street who's chanting from the river to the sea, you ask him, what river are you talking about? I don't know. What sea are you talking about? I don't know. You know, oh, well, good. It's good you want to run the world because, you know, I'm a hillbilly. And there's a reason hillbillies have round shoulders and flat heads. Do you know what it is?
I do not, although I am also a hillbilly.
Yeah, well, I thought so. I could tell by your round shoulders and flat heads. But you ask a hillbilly question, an IR one, and they go, I don't know. You tell them the answer, they go, So that's the way you get, anyhow. I think that's, are there any questions in the audience? Does anybody want me to embarrass myself? Sir?
One question. We got time for
one.
one.
Come on, we got more time than that. Come on.
What is your position, recommendation about the people who lied to the court? To my knowledge, only one person lying says this.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that the least they should do should be barred from ever practicing before a federal agency again. Most of these will want to make their living by leaving government and becoming people familiar with the system who can help get justice for you. I think this disbarment, maybe not, but their law license, and I think lying to a federal judge. We got people there are a couple of Trump operatives. Who's the guy in jail now for having lied to Congress? I mean, I was a member of the Congress just for 6 years, and then many of you helped me lose to the dead guy, which is fine. It's up to you. It's your right. But the Congress has a license to lie. They have a statutory immunity. They can sit there and lie all day and all night. And then someone comes in the same arena and lies to them, all of a sudden they're in the slammer. Somehow that doesn't make sense to me. And particularly to lie as a way of getting access to the privacy of civil rights of American citizens is a most serious offense. And if not incarceration, certainly things like debarment. Sir.
After seeing many 9/11 documentaries, it seems like they've interviewed everyone but yourself. Could you briefly give us the story about President Bush's representatives coming to you in the hospital bed and what took place?
You know, I have never shared information between the clients and let me just suffice this. The outcome of that was that the proposal was rejected, and the right thing was done by the administration. I will confess that there were a group of us that said we would resign if there had not been a correction of the anticipated activity. I think, any lawyer that won't tell his client that what he's doing is about to be a violation of the law is not worth his salt. I don't think you're heroic if you keep your client out of trouble. And if you need to say to your client, if you want to proceed, you'll have to get a different lawyer because I'm not able to sign off on this, then so be it. And you may or may not be right. I need to say one other thing. Sorry about this, Mo.
That's okay.
One Mo thing.
No.
Okay. Much of what the president does is done pursuant to two responsibilities he has. First, he is the commander-in-chief and responsible for defending America. And number two, he is in charge of foreign relations, the relationships between the United States and foreign governments and foreign powers. Those constitutional authorities are not elaborated on in the Constitution. He has this general authority, and the question is, well, what if the Congress decides it wants to say, you can't do certain of the things you've done for the last 200 years, presidents have done for 200 years. We're going to limit your authority now. It was constitutional authority, at least it was conceded for 200 years, but now we're going to say you can't do it. I'm not sure you can amend the Constitution in the Congress. There must be a scholar over here. You see, because to amend the Constitution, you have to have a supermajority of the Congress refer it to the states, and the states then have to endorse it by a supermajority in order to change it. So there is, in the background of all this talk about FISA, which came into existence in the 1970s, some of you remember Senator Church and the Church Commission that revealed some of the abuses that happened. In the background of all that is the fact that George Washington steamed open the mail, and that Woodrow Wilson monitored all the communications in and out of the United States in the Second World War, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt started it on the 8th of December in 1941. And that presidents throughout history up until the 1970s had done all these things based on their fundamental powers in the Constitution. And whether the extent to which those can be adjusted is very questionable. There's one major case on the FISA court. It's called the FISA Court of Review. I happen to challenge the FISA court. I've made it my living to challenge about everything in my life. But anyhow, and they indicated that there is nothing that the Congress can do to inhibit the president's exercise of his inherent powers. They can embellish his powers, but they cannot inhibit his powers. So, geez, that was the one Mo thing. I don't see any other hands.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, I've let us go 15 minutes over. If I let you answer another question, my boss is going to thump me on the head.
Oh, boy, this is going to... Can I see a hand out there? Thank you.
So please, all of you join me in thanking Attorney General John Ashcroft.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you very much. And Honorable Ashcroft, thank you very much for your time and presentation. I must tell you that I fully resonate with you that everything has to be outcome assessed based. And your university here, our graduates fetch the highest starting salary than any university in the state of Missouri, including Washington University, a private university. So, yeah. So thank you all. I'd like to take this time to tell you about an event that will happen on campus tomorrow, May 1. You have likely driven by our new innovation lab. Tomorrow, the Rolla Chamber of Commerce will host a ribbon cutting for this wonderful facility at 2 p.m. And attendees can tour the innovation lab afterwards. I encourage all community members who are interested in learning more about this building to attend the ceremony and go on a tour. We are very, very proud of our newest building on campus, an innovation laboratory. And 2:00 p.m. tomorrow is the new opening for the innovation lab. I also like to let everybody know of the upcoming speakers, Chancellor speakers, the Honorable Orona Miller, who's the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, an alumni of Missouri S&T, will be here. She will be here in the fall. And Honorable Alberto Gonzalez, another former Attorney General, will be here on campus as well as a speaker. So I encourage you to check the Speaker Series website. It's called the speakerseries.mst.edu for details on events that as they near our time. So thank you all very much. This concludes our program. Have a good evening.